June 2026 was supposed to be the ultimate victory lap for the traditional film industry. The summer blockbuster season is historically where Hollywood studios print their cash, subsidizing their failures for the rest of the year. Instead, what we just witnessed was a historic multi-hundred-million-dollar financial bloodbath. In a single 30-day window, the legacy studios collectively incinerated hundreds of millions of dollars of shareholder wealth. They bet the house on decades-old nostalgia, bloated superhero budgets, and untouchable prestige directors. And they lost on a scale that is terrifying Wall Street. But while the titans of the industry were burning cash in the streets, a completely new wave of filmmakers quietly pulled off the greatest financial heist in box office history. A 20-year-old YouTuber generated a $118 million opening weekend for A24 without a traditional marketing campaign. A horror movie shot for a microscopic $750,000 printed $250 million, proving that the old rules of Hollywood math are completely dead. This is not just a story about good movies versus bad movies. This is a story about a structural collapse in the entertainment business. This is the anatomy of a financial catastrophe and the hidden mechanics of the greatest return on investment the industry has ever seen. Let's pop the hood on the June box office and look at the exact numbers the studios are desperately trying to hide from you. To understand the sheer scale of the failure we saw this June, we have to look at the exact mathematical formula that studios have relied on for 20 years: intellectual property and the nostalgia premium. For decades, executives believed that if a brand existed in the 1980s or 90s, it was a guaranteed money printer. In June 2026, that formula shattered completely. Let's look at the biggest financial crater of the month, Sony's Masters of the Universe. On paper, the executives thought they had a home run, a $200 million live-action reboot of a legendary toy line. But it opened to a catastrophic $29 million domestically. Now, you might think a $200 million movie only needs to make $201 million to be profitable. This is the biggest lie in Hollywood. And to understand why Masters of the Universe is a financial disaster, you need to understand the 2.5x break-even rule. When a studio spends $200 million making a movie, they spend another $100 million on global marketing, billboards, YouTube ads, press tours. That is called the P&A budget, or prints and advertising. So the movie actually costs $300 million before a single ticket is sold. But here is the kicker: the studios do not keep all the box office money. Enter the ticket split extortion. On average, movie theaters keep about 50% of the ticket revenue globally. This means for Sony to simply pay back their $300 million investment, Masters of the Universe had to gross $600 million worldwide just to break even. Anything less is a loss. With a $29 million opening, the retention data shows audiences swiped away immediately. The movie will be lucky to cross $150 million globally, resulting in a net loss of over $200 million for the studio. They banked on nostalgia, but they delivered a weak story structure, and the audience punished them for it. But Sony wasn't the only one bleeding out. Enter Warner Bros. Discovery and DC's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. After the modest success of the new Superman reboot, executives assumed the cinematic universe was safe. They assumed superhero fatigue was a myth. They were entirely wrong. Supergirl opened to a devastating $37 million domestic weekend against an estimated $160 million production budget. The exact same break-even math applies here. Warner Bros. Is carrying massive corporate debt, and they needed this film to generate $450 million just to keep the lights on. Instead, they are looking at a 9-figure write-down. And it wasn't just the IP machines that failed. Even the untouchable legends got destroyed. Steven Spielberg released his massive $200 million adult sci-fi epic Disclosure Day. The result? A massive box office bomb. The diagnosis across all 3 of these massive flops is identical. Hollywood wrote $250 million checks that audiences under the age of 25 flat out refused to cash. You cannot spend $250 million forcing bloated visual effects down the throats of a generation that demands high-paced, high-retention storytelling. If the first 15 minutes of your movie doesn't act like a hyper-optimized YouTube hook, modern audiences mentally walk out of the theater.
I'm just worried that you're not going to find your stride here if you keep going off-world all the time.
Now, this doesn't mean all legacy IP is dead. In fact, June 2026 proved that when studios are terrified of losing money, they will pay what we call the desperation premium. Toy Story 5 and Universal's Super Mario Galaxy movie completely annihilated the competition, both crossing $1 billion globally. But why did these work when Masters of the Universe failed? Because Disney and Universal didn't just fund movies, they executed mathematical certainties. These properties possess absolute cross-generational audience retention. They keep the children hooked with visuals, and the millennial parents hooked with emotional payoffs. But here's the real financial secret behind these mega hits. Because theater chains are desperate for guaranteed foot traffic to sell their 1,200% marked up popcorn, mega studios like Disney hold a gun to the theaters' heads. Disney doesn't accept the standard 50-50 ticket split for a movie like Toy Story 5. They use a sliding scale, demanding up to 65 or even 70% of the ticket sales on opening weekend. They squeeze the theaters dry because they know they're the only ones keeping the lights on. These movies aren't just films, they're 2-hour commercials for theme parks, merchandising, and streaming subscriptions. Even Scary Movie 6 broke a comedy franchise record with a $55 million opening because they kept the budget under $30 million and targeted their core demographic with lethal precision. But while the old guard was either burning cash or relying on 30-year-old cartoons, a completely different economy was thriving in the shadows. Enter A24's Backrooms, based on a massive internet creepypasta directed by Kane Parsons, a filmmaker who built his empire on YouTube and is still in his early 20s. Backrooms opened to a staggering $118 million globally. It became the highest opening weekend ever for an original horror film. How? By completely ignoring the traditional Hollywood playbook. A24 didn't spend $75 million on useless television spots or highway billboards. They realized that customer acquisition cost in 2026 is driven entirely by the algorithm. They weaponized the internet. They activated existing digital communities, turning viewers into free marketing agents. They understood that a viral, decentralized marketing campaign on social media converts at a massively higher rate than a forced corporate trailer. And that brings us to the absolute crown jewel of June 2026, the movie that fundamentally broke Hollywood's math, Obsession. Focus Features picked up the distribution, went on to gross over $225 million worldwide, modern cinematic history. And the genius of this production? There were no massive above-the-line salaries. The director and lead actors took scale pay, the legal minimum, in exchange for first-dollar gross back-end points. While the executives at Sony are explaining a $200 million loss to their shareholders, the creators of a $750K indie movie just walked away with 8-figure payout checks. They didn't need CGI explosions. They needed a script that hacked human psychology. So, what is the ultimate mathematical lesson from the June 2026 box office bloodbath? The era of the bloated, arrogant Hollywood blank check is dead and buried. You can no longer throw $250 million at a wall, slap a legacy logo on it, and expect a return on investment. The audience is awake, their attention spans are ruthlessly filtered, and they hold all the power. Moving forward, studios have exactly two options for survival. You either engineered the flawless, cross-generational, mathematically tested machine of a Pixar sequel and extort the theaters for every penny they have, or you strip the budgets down to the bone, abandon the traditional marketing machine, and rely on airtight, high-retention scripts that spread like digital wildfire. If your movie doesn't have a killer hook in the first 5 minutes, a relentlessly tight story, and an unforgettable payoff, the 2026 box office will chew you up, spit you out, and bankrupt your studio in the process.